Hey everybody, it's Mad Master here. I'm doing another video today, and this is a kind of a explanation video. I've decided to do a series of kind of metal elitist videos again. I had a channel on YouTube called Metal Elitist, or the Metal Elitist. I was going to do that. I think I did a Trivium review of In Waves on there back in the day because I hated everything past Shogun pretty much that I've heard from Trivium. And yeah, I shouldn't even like Trivium because it's not like that should not be in my wheelhouse being a metal elitist, but I do like some of their albums and like some of their parts of songs and stuff. Same with a few other bands I won't even mention because I would be crucified if I mentioned I liked the a band that a certain drummer joined for a while from a certain famous prog metal band. I do like some of their stuff. Okay, actually, I probably like them more than. And of course, I'm speaking of a very radio rock. See, the thing about radio rock and metalcore, whatever you call it, some of it had gone back to the things I liked about metal, which I'm going to explain in this video. The things that are more metal to me than jumping up and down in Jinkos, rapping to some 7-string guitar. Some of the metalcore bands went more to that, and I saw that in the more in the mainstream than I had in a while, and I kind of latched on to some of it. I was like, oh, they're playing solos again. So I'm gonna explain this whole thing. So new metal, why I don't like new metal, part 2500 7,000 million trillion and one. This is that number of video. It's kind of a revisitation of things I've already talked about, but I'm just gonna kind of chunk it down a little bit more. So when new metal came out, when it first came out, I had already listened to like a lot of the alternative metal bands, so to speak. Like, I liked Faith No More. I had one of their tapes, Real Thing. I like them more now than I did back then, by the way, I should say. I'd heard Mr. Bungle, and I heard, I liked or should I even mention their ST, Tendencies, Blank Tendencies. I don't know about YouTube algorithms and stuff. They might think it's not a band name. The band with Mike Muir, Vicious Grooves as well. I'd heard all that stuff. I'd heard some of the early rap metal, Body Count. I don't think I heard. Did I have Body Count? I can't remember if I heard that back then. I heard a lot of the songs. I think I heard some of the songs. I heard a lot of the songs. I had already heard like this like kind of rap metal or rock hybrid stuff being done. So around the time like the first Korn album came out, I was in high school. This could count as a history of metal part 5 or whatever. I'm not going to put it my history in metal part 5, but I'm just going to do this. And if I repeat myself in a future video, if I continue to do that series, by the way, please forgive me because I'll talk about this a little bit more. So at that point in time, one of my best friends was really into death metal, and he had abandoned Pantera essentially because he's like, when Far Beyond Driven came out, and I can back him up on some of these ideas that I see. He called it hair death metal. He's like, oh yeah, they used to be a glam band, but this is like hair death metal, like poser death metal. Like it's trying to be extreme, but it's like really fake, like really slickly produced, like in this way, like. And I'm talking about mainly the second half of Far Beyond Driven, and then the albums that came like Great Southern Trendkill, albums like that. And he was already into like Morbid Angel, Deicide, a lot of the Relapse Records roster, a lot of the Nuclear Blast roster, that were coming out. They had Death at the Beginning compilations that came out and stuff. You had those, all these classic bands that came out back then, or Napalm Death. It's just a lot of this stuff. Carcass. I don't think he liked Carcass at first, but then he later really liked Carcass a lot. One of my best friends in high school. So he was already listening to a lot of this stuff, and I heard some of it. And it was kind of a Christian back then, so I was kind of scared of the satanic thing. Even though we used to see this Deicide Morbid Angel cover band play this youth club in this town. And I loved it. I loved going to those shows, but I would not bring myself to listen to those bands at home, but I loved seeing the show. So I was a closet like Deicide fan back in 1993, probably, or 94, or whenever this was. 94. I wanted to see this band. So I was obsessed. So, not obsessed. I wasn't obsessed. Sorry. I was really into it. I was into it even back then. So I was already hearing a lot of these bands. I really like Napalm Death and Carcass because it was like it freed me from like the satanic death metal thing. So I used to tell people I don't like death metal, I like grindcore, which is pretty pretentious and stupid, but it's like trying to differentiate myself between the death metal people. And I think he liked death as well in some of those bands. Um, but yeah, it was like this thing. And when that Pantera album came out, we were just like, I was like, what the hell? You know, it's just like so cheesy, like slaughter, like well, even like was it Slaughtered? Was Slaughtered on Slaughtered? The song Slaughtered, like it was just like so cheesy, you know. Like compared to death metal, which is more like serious stuff that was seriously from that lineage. Because you don't hear Dimebag talk about when he bought the first Repulsion demo. I'm sounding like Justin Horville. You never heard Dimebag here, blah, 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 you didn't hear about that. Phil Anselmo probably had it, but not Dimebag. He probably had, Motley Crue's newest album or whatever, maybe Metallica. But anyways, I'm not just saying Dimebag. I'm just saying at the time, when those releases were coming out. So we heard this thing, and it was kind of cheesy. And there was this kid in high school, and I don't want to offend him if he ever watches this video. I don't hate the guy, but I'll just say that he hung out with us, and he was kind of a hanger-on in a way, well, this is a time when I was getting high in high school and stuff, in which at one point pot started making me feel weird because I was on SSRIs, I think, way later on, and I stopped doing that stuff. But I don't know if it's because of that. Like the next day I feel really weird. I have this like weird pot hangover, and that's why I don't do it much anymore. So, if at all. So this whole thing, like he used to hang out with us, but he was like getting into these bands, like the proto new metal bands, and he had the first Korn album. Machine had these groove metal bands. A lot of people on Metal Archives think groove metal is poser metal. They called it half thrash, in the words of Ultra Boris, the infamous review poster on there. So, because it's halfway to thrash, but it's not quite there. Like the riff isn't played. To me, new metal sounded like it was early on. I was like, yeah, this is okay. I'd rather hear Body Count's first album or something Tendencies band. I'm not gonna say Join the Army or How I Laugh Tomorrow or even Art of Rebellion, which I didn't like until later. I didn't really hear it till later, or even Lights Camera Revolution, albums like that, that had, or even some of the groovier Faith No More albums, or I'm just trying to think of more bands like that I liked. Machine Head's first album is okay, it's decent. He liked some of that stuff, and I was just like, at the time I was kind of getting into like goth industrial because I was kind of a poser in that realm, because my friend, some of my new friends liked that stuff, and I still like that stuff. I draw a line between that. Like I liked that stuff. I got into it. I acclimated to it, but I love it now. I actually absolutely love that stuff, and I still do. And I started to like it because I had a crush on this girl, and like my friend was into that scene, and then it was just kind of got into that whole thing. So around that time, I heard these bands, and I was like, they're rapping, Downset, I think was one of them, or, Propane, some of these proto groove pre-new metal bands. Prawn, I like Prawn actually quite a lot. Some of these bands this guy got into, and he had the first Korn, and I was like, and Fear Factory, like some of their albums, and I heard them, and I'm like, okay, there's some good stuff there, but the riffing, to me, and this is coming from a punk simplistic person that likes a lot, not simplistic mindset, simplistic stuff. I liked a lot of simplistic stuff. Liked a lot of grunge. I liked a lot of punk, hardcore punk and stuff. Misfits, some songs just have 3 chords, Ramones. Some of the bands that came out almost made that seem complicated. Like the way that they would write guitar riffs would just be like this, repetitive motif with some dissonance sometimes. Like think of Blind by Korn, played in this sloppy manner. I don't care about the slop necessarily, because I like a lot of sloppy stuff. I just mentioned grunge, a lot of it's sloppy, and done in this way that's really annoying, and like had this like kind of riff. And I think it's Gain of Four that had that kind of like stop start kind of dynamic, that the first band that did that, one of the first bands, people say they're like influenced new metal or whatever, NU metal with an umlaut on it. And I heard that stuff, and I was just like, I could listen to like 3 or 4 songs, but then I would turn it off because for some reason, even like Fear Factory and stuff, it was just like it beat you over the head, but it was missing something. And I can't really explain musically completely what it was missing. I mean, I like Chaos AD quite a bit, which is weird for a person like me. I hate Roots. I hate the early Soulfly stuff before they went back to metal. I'll say. I hated all that stuff, and I just like I saw it. And it was like and this suburban teen angst thing that happened with it. It was like okay, so it was a little bit more okay. I'm going to go into class now, and this is a little bit offensive, and people might call me a commie or something for saying this stuff. But I do think it's worth an analysis or a mention. So a lot of the kids that liked this stuff when it came out, when I was actually a young adult, late teenager, um, I was already like back into metal at that point when new metal came out. I was like, the thing is, what happened was, Korn came out. A lot of normie kids liked it. I was getting more and more underground, ordering from these mail order companies from overseas. There was a place in Milwaukee that had import albums that I ordered from, and I would buy these albums, like all these old power metal, some maybe some prog or some you know uh, black metal, and well, a lot of not a lot of black metal, but enough black metal to say I was a fan. I'd buy these albums, and people would mention Korn to me. I'm like, yeah, Korn is weak sauce, man, compared to like fucking, listen to Anal Cunt. I mean, I'm not a fan of Anal Cunt. I'm just thinking of something that's way more extreme. It's like, it just doesn't do it for me. I'd rather, I mean, I loved Nine Inch Nails, and I loved, I liked some of that stuff, Thrill Kill Cult and stuff, but I just never got into Marilyn Manson either. I respect Marilyn Manson, what he was doing, but Korn was like this Marilyn Manson whiny kind of like vocal over like this repetitive motif with rapping. I'm like not a big rap fan either. I never was. So you had these mixtures of these different elements that and you brought the more annoying elements to the surface and made it repetitive. So to me, also the people that got into it really annoyed me too, because it's not diehard metal fans that get into Korn and stuff. And except for these 3 death metal guys that I went to high school with, got caught. One of them caught the bug. I heard secondhand. Secondhand. They saw him with a Korn shirt or something, working at a fast food or something. So it's a really funny story. Luke, Sean, and Sean. I'm just gonna say their names. I don't fucking care. This is like 30 years ago. Who cares? So this whole thing happened. I was just like, and I just didn't have time to like check it out because it just didn't do anything for me. The guitar riffs were boring to me. Dissonance, Voivod, what can I say? Godflesh, the Swans, old school Swan stuff. Dissonance is really cool when it's used well. I think that stuff was simple enough. I mean, listen to like Rats by Godflesh. It's a couple chords, but it's still done in the presentation is just less annoying than Korn, Blind. Like, it's just like this. And okay, let's talk about the teen angst thing, the teen angst angle, and why that was so influential. I was into Black Flag, obsessed with Black Flag. I almost got a tattoo. Okay, I got Rollins Band, Black Flag, all that stuff. I was obsessed. I already heard people screaming about their life, like Henry Rollins. He already did it perfect. To me, it was perfect. You cannot get, for that kind of stuff, for like screaming about how pissed off you are and stuff. And this might sound normie because this underground hardcore band from Philadelphia was way more hardcore than Black Flag. Of course it was. And Siege, invented grindcore. I mean, I already know all this shit. So, but when I heard Black Flag, like as an early teenager, I was like, this is it, man. My War, Damaged, Slip It In, Loose Nut, the early stuff, the first 4 years, everything went black. To me, that you couldn't get like that teen angst, not normie, but teen angst hardcore aggression any better. So when you heard like Jonathan Davis do this like whiny kind of Trent Reznor sort of ish, Mike Patton ish kind of whiny kind of vocal, and then mix it with screams, it just didn't. have the same impact because I was already listening to, I had already heard this before in this different style of presentation that I liked better. Because, you know, so being a teenager in suburban Los Angeles or Orange County in their case, or whatever, Korn's case or whatever, it didn't hit me in the same way. I'm like, I've heard this before in a certain way, but I don't like the way it's presented in this way. So I was like, fuck it, I'll rather buy the Rhapsody album, you know, Legendary Tales from Ram Music for $40 or whatever. It wasn't $40, but, you know, case in point, you know, it's just like I was just getting into more, or Labyrinth. I just remember when I bought the Labyrinth album when it came in the mail and stuff, and I was scared it was going to get stolen at the apartment that I was living at. Because I don't think anything ever got stolen, but, you know, it's just like, it was my first time living in an apartment, one of the first times. So, you know, I bought a lot of these albums, these power metal albums. I was like, I just like this more. It's catchier, and just I can listen to the whole album. I don't get tired of it. There's no ear fatigue from just like listening to this boring shit, you know, over and over again. And it just was like, that's just what I grew up with. And, you know, I heard the early extreme stuff, the early screaming, you know. So I heard Korn, I heard, you know, Limp, and the rapping, just the hip hop presentation. So a lot of people ask, is new metal? It's a permutation of metal, nevertheless. But let's talk about something else that happened during that time. The interviews these bands gave. I used to read the interviews, you know, with Coal Chamber, Korn, Limp Bizkit, whatever. And at the time, metal was dead. So what did they say they liked? They didn't say they liked it. It's like, you read their interviews, and they was like, yeah, we're not. I read an interview with Korn. It's like, we're not metal. Like, they said they weren't metal at one point, in the mid to late '90s. And then also they was like, we don't sound like Carcass or some shit. And that kind of disregard for the history of metal just immediately cut me off from that stuff, because I was just reading these interviews where there's just dissed metal. Of course, Lars dissed metal plenty at that time too, or Rob Halford. Metal is dead. Listen to Two. Yeah, fuck you. You know, anyways. You know, then he came back 2 years later. It did fucking the Halford album. He's like, metal's alive again. You know. So the whole time was just a very problematic time, toxic time. I'm gonna use some buzzwords as sauce, mid, you know, whatever. I forgot the other word, res or something. Res. I don't fucking know. I'm gonna learn all the new words so I can be hip. So you heard a lot of these albums, and you're like. And these albums that were coming out, you know, and Limp Bizkit came out. It's like, this is a joke, you know, it's kind of a joke about all that stuff. Now, I have respect for Limp Bizkit, because at least they like, and the music, okay, I'm going to get to that in a minute. The music just didn't have a lot of substance, like, didn't, you know, I don't mean like missing a guitar solo even. It's just like, just didn't have as much grit to it. You listen to sludge metal, you know. You listen to doom metal, and a lot of it's simplistic. A lot of it, I mean, sludge metal is more simplistic too, and it just has this edge to it that the new metal didn't. The new metal was really slickly produced too, so it's like you have this angst that's almost neutered by the production, and you also have a guitar tone that's sloppy. These different elements just didn't add up to the mix. I used to have a friend played bass from one of my projects for a while. He hated Melodeath, like In Flames, At the Gates, you know, all that stuff. And he just didn't like how the death metal was mixed in with the traditional or power metal influences that had. And I understand that sometimes these things clash in your ears, you know, these things. And new metal always did that to me. It was like, it just had this weird, like, annoying thing. And the people were annoying. And the thing is, it was a little bit more middle class than metal. Because metal in the 80s and stuff, because it was like, less the working class. I mean, actually, a lot of working class people like new metal too, and they like the post grunge stuff around here, like the metal dad, the dad that likes one metal band video that hopefully I'd posted by now. That I explained that. So, because they like a lot of the post grunge, like they like Metallica, but they won't listen to Overkill. They won't listen to like a newer thrash band either. You know, they're just like one band. You know, fuck off. You know, that's what I'm gonna say. It's a So yeah, this new metal thing, I just hated it. You know, it's just like, it got so inundated in the music scene too. It's like on the radio, it's everywhere. It's like, what about Blind fucking Guardian? You know, I mean, what about, you know, a lot of the stuff I liked, nobody gave a shit about. Nobody cared at the time, at least. Now power metal is a little bit more popular than it was back then, But you know, you have like Lords of the Trident, that's huge in this town because they're from this town. You know, there's a little bit better now, I'll admit. So, but back then it was completely cut off. People would just look at you funny. This guy, this Motley Crue fan who I worked with at Walgreens, is like, Blind Guardian, is that a Christian band? Is that like Christian band Guardian? Oh, I like one of their songs. And people thought it was a D&D shirt. They didn't know what the fuck it was. And nobody knew what the fuck it was back then. I was doing the battery thing. So my whole thing was like, okay, well, I stand out by liking this weird shit, other than a couple of my friends that liked it too. And it was just like, I was all alone. I was all fucking renegade and shit. And I was a rebel. I was truly rebellious, I guess, because you had to travel to Milwaukee to see, you know, these shows that would play too. Living in this fucking college town, and metal was never really that big anyway. So, but the new metal thing's like, oh, I like Korn. It's like, you're a normie. You've never heard like fucking, you know, maybe you've heard like Kill 'Em All, but you haven't heard like half the bands that were doing, even Anthrax. You don't even know Anthrax. You don't even know fucking, you know, it's like the apathy. Okay, this is what it is. The apathy about exploring your roots and history, or checking out different stuff that you might like with these types of people that just like jumped on the bandwagon of like maybe three or four new metal bands, and then went to Ozfest. And then another thing that pissed me off about that whole crowd was they were annoying. First of all, it's like the Woodstock '99 crowd. This like kind of jock white trash sort of mixture, sort of into like sort of metalhead, like this weird hybrid of the three. They're really annoying. That was the new metal thing. Whereas like the old metal thing, which I'm complaining about now, I complained about it back then when it was around, but I hated it. It was like this trashy, like working class guy that worked on his Pontiac Trans Am Firebird on his front lawn, which I really want that car, by the way. As you can probably see in the background, because I'll probably use it for this video. I don't know. Who knows? So it's like this whole thing just distilled. It was really annoying. Okay, it was really annoying, and this is why when people mention new metal to me now, I'm like, maybe I'm too old for it too. Maybe I was too old for it at the time, you know, but maybe not. I don't know. But I just hated it, and I still do, and I still hate the revival. Like there's a revival going on a little bit, and it just didn't appeal to me. I'd rather hear people screaming about dragons. Another thing, I'm going to mention something else. This is coming to me. I didn't write this out, obviously. This is an off-the-cuff video. Another thing that annoyed me about the new metal thing is like, okay, so at the time I was getting into more fantastical kind of metal, because the 90s were really annoying. Everything had to be real and earthy and the street and all this shit, because it was an earth decade. I say the 80s were an air decade. I'm just going to use some astrological mumbo jumbo shit to say that, but I have a relative who loves this concept, by the way, and I might actually do more about this. We have to talk about like real life and like being on the street and shit like that. You know, we can't talk about dragons or demons or it's like, I was like, fuck that. I'm gonna listen to Blind Guardian, be transported to medieval times, even if it's the fantasy medieval times, you know, whatever. Excalibur, fucking, you know, Lord of the Ring, you know, Lord of the Rings. I mean, you know, Lord of the Rings, you know, Tolkien, you know, shit like that. Michael Moorcock, you know, all this stuff. And I was just like, yeah, that's great, man. Or even Amorphous Tales from the Thousand Lakes. It's all about this old folk, you know, these old folk tales from Finland and shit. It's like, why would I listen to something about teen angst? I didn't even experience enough of my adolescence to even relate to that, because I was a fucking dork. But like, I still am. But and I didn't experience enough of that stuff. Like, and being pissed off at your parents, you know, and like in suburbia and skateboarding and stuff. And I love the skater thing. I was an early, you know, loved skating when I was like 11, 12. You know, I bought a Veriflex board, you know, and got these better accessories for it, you know, even though it was Veriflex. At least I didn't have a Nash or a Banana board, but you know, that was back then, that was like a big deal. Like Santa Cruz was the best one, or fucking, you know, that was the best shit you can buy, you know, those kinds of boards, which I actually want to get an old school skateboard sometime. And I said I was going to do it this year, but I will actually get one of those old school, like reissue skateboards, and try to ride it. Fuck, it's going to be a mess. But I'm probably going back to martial arts, so it might be a little easier once I get more in better shape. So I don't mean weight, I just mean like actual shape of your joints and your stuff, like being more airflow and blood flow and being more practiced and more in shape, and literally in shape. So yeah, I already went through the teen angst like skater thing, and this was like kind of fake to me. This was kind of, this new metal thing was kind of fake. It was just seemed kind of like astroturfed from the record industry. Like this was already around, like these types of bands, like it just was like, and it was a continuation. Okay, this is the one thing that hits the nail on the head about what I thought about it and why I think it was a compromise. Okay, it was a compromise because I had this friend in this. Actually, I loosely know him now, or I know, I'm social media friends with him. It was in these bands in the late '90s and stuff, and he said heavy music. It was like metal was a bad word. I don't think that was why he said it, but he's just kind of expressing the vernacular of the time when we mentioned heavy music. Oh, it's cool to have people into heavy music or something. There's one conversation we had once. So anyways, the whole thing with the new metal thing was like, okay, the angst ridden 90s, like watered down, kind of like no guitar solos, no wankery, no 80s high vocals or concepts, even like all about the street, or you're pissed off, or politics sometimes, all that kind of stuff, or rap subjects or whatever, like Limp Bizkit. All that stuff's cool, but don't put any of that older stuff from heavy metal in there. No, we're gonna compromise. We're gonna have a little bit of heavier guitars and a little bit of more like, kind of a heavy metal kind of like heaviness, but let's put all the 90s bullshit into it and then have teens like it. That's new metal. That's NU metal. That's why I fucking hated it. It's like, you're gonna throw away all this history and all this stuff and water it down and just refine, throw away all the good stuff about heavy metal and just fucking I hated that shit. I still do. I mean, I'll tell you about a friend who, for some reason, doesn't talk to me much anymore. He's a lawyer now. Maybe that's why, because he doesn't want to be associated with such plebs like I. But anyways, he told me about this new metal band he saw at this show, because he hated it. He was in the same boat as I was. It was just like, fuck that shit. I don't like it. I mean, maybe he liked one of the bands, a little bit. He liked Kitty, I know that, which is a little bit better. It's like more in the Slipknot direction, a little bit heavier, which I don't like. I like Kitty more than Slipknot, believe it or not. So he saw this band, this new metal band. He's like, they said, I've got all this shit inside, So it was like, okay, this like teen angst, like angst-ridden lyrics that were just really already hackneyed at the time, and really done in a super obvious way. It's not like Damaged, like Black Flag. Listen to that, like for some teen angst, 1981, doing that kind of shit. But it's like better. It's just better presented. It's deeper. It cuts deeper. It's like, I got all this shit inside. I fucking hate me. Like, these lyrics are totally fucking cringe for one, compared to even Greg Ginn or Henry Rollins' lyrics of Black Flag, Rollins band. I mean, was it Robert Palmer, the great critic of Rolling Stone, not the singer, said a lot of Rollins' songs are about personal integrity. They're not, if you read it between the lines, you can kind of follow a narrative that's a lot different than just like making money off of screaming in front of crowd, screaming break shit or go break shit like Limp Bizkit or whatever, like at Woodstock 99. I fucking hated that shit. And I don't like a lot of the hip hop aesthetic either. I mean, some of it's okay, some of it. But, like any Generation X or Zennial or whatever, I like, the Wu-Tang, the only rap groups I like are Wu-Tang Clan, Public Enemy, Ice-T, and NWA, or, maybe Cypress Hill or something. I like all the cliched stuff for rap. But anyways, so there was one other band I was trying to think of, one group. But yeah, that's that's pretty much how, or Ice Cube too. It's not bad. That stuff is good. Like the soundtrack to Judgment Night, I think it's way better than any new metal band. Way heavier, way more metal. So that kind of sums up why I hated new metal. It doesn't really sum it up. It kind of explains it a little bit too much, but that's why I hated it. I still fucking hate it. I will always just say I don't like Korn. I don't like Limp Bizkit. Limp Bizkit's a little bit better in a certain way because at least they say they suck, and it's kind of funny. Like KMFDM sucks. Like they say that they're so cheesy and over the top. They're like they say they suck, and it's kind of this self-ironic self thing, like with the toilet on stage. I'm not talking about KMFDM, Limp Bizkit at the toilet on stage, and just like Limp Bizkit sucks and like all this stuff. And I thought that's kind of funny. It's kind of endearing, you know. So Cold Chamber, you know, it just bored me. It's just boring stuff too. It's just bored me. It's like, you know, maybe the guitar tone is heavy as death metal, but it's playing this really repetitive riff too. It's like, I just don't want to hear that. It's like if I hear it just didn't work for me. Just the song structures, everything. I can go into more depth of this why I don't like it, but I just don't want to waste too much time today. But you know, 30 minutes is enough. So that's about all.